Hi, everybody. We're going to read Nancy Drew and the Secret of the Golden Pavilion. We're going to start with this first two chapters today and talk about them tomorrow on our Zoom book club meeting. Hope you all enjoy this and bear with me as I read through it. So, Chapter 1, A Moonlight Burglar. Nancy Drew, her lovely blue eyes sparkling with excitement, stared in fascination from the cabin of a private helicopter. The craft was headed for the River Heights Airport, a few miles beyond. Below, the rooftops of the town stood out clearly in the moonlight. "We're almost home, Togo," Nancy said to the terrier beside her. Fastened in his collar was a blue ribbon that he had won at a dog show in the city some distance away. Leaning forward, Nancy asked the pilot, "Could we please go lower? I'd love to see my house from the air." The young man shook his head. "It's against regulations. Maybe these will help you." He handed her a pair of binoculars. Nancy adjusted them, and in a moment her house came into focus. "I see it!" she exclaimed. But a second later, she suddenly gasped in alarm. "A man's climbing into the dormer window on our third floor." "You mean a burglar?" the pilot asked. "Yes. All our windows on the first and second floors are wired for a burglar alarm. The thief must know that. Oh dear, he may harm Hannah." Quickly, Nancy explained that Hannah Gruen was the Drews' housekeeper, and that Mrs. Gruen had been like a mother to her since she was a little girl and had lost her own mother. "Radio the airport tower, please," Nancy urged. "Tell them what's happening and ask them to page my father. He's waiting for me. He can contact the police to catch the burglar." Instantly, the pilot made the call. Then, at Nancy's request, he began to circle above the Drew home. Less than 5 minutes later, they saw the burglar step out backward from the dormer window onto a long, slender ladder. In his hand was a briefcase. "It must be one of Dad's," Nancy told the pilot. The intruder made a nimble descent and then collapsed the ladder into a small bundle, picked it up, and disappeared among the trees that lined the Drew driveway. "Please relay all this to the tower," Nancy begged. The pilot followed her request and then said, "I'd better get to the field pronto." His landing was cleared, and soon the helicopter was standing on the concrete runway. Nancy tucked Togo under her arm and her purse under the other. While the pilot grabbed her weekend bag, the two hurried to the gate. At the exit stood a taxi driver whom Nancy knew well. "Good evening, Joe," she said. "Evening," he replied. "Your father asked me to drive you home. I hear you've been having some excitement at your house. Mr. Drew said something about his fetching the police and nabbing a burglar." "Then Dad did get the message," Nancy exclaimed. "Let's hope they caught the thief before he got off the grounds." She thanked the pilot for his assistance and then ran to Joe's taxi and hopped in. He drove as quickly as possible to Nancy's home. As the taxi came to a halt at the front door of the large brick house, Mr. Drew stepped from the doorway and took Nancy in his arms. "So good to see you again," said the tall, distinguished-looking lawyer. "It's good to be here," his daughter replied. "The burglar, did you catch him?" "Unfortunately, no." Togo, who had scampered into the house, was running around in circles and yipping with joy at being home. In a moment, Hannah Gruen appeared from the rear of the house. "Are you all right, Hannah?" Nancy asked as she hugged the housekeeper affectionately. "Oh, yes, but to tell you the truth, I'm mighty embarrassed. I didn't even hear that burglar," she went on. "I dropped off to sleep waiting for you and your father and never woke up once. By the way, what did the man take?" she asked Mr. Drew. The lawyer said that so far he could find out the burglar had been after only one thing, a briefcase containing papers relating to a new case which he had just taken. The intruder may have wanted these for some special reason, but also he may have been after an odd-looking object that was in the briefcase. My client was sending it to you, Nancy. It was a copy of a rare old Polynesian artifact, a wooden figure, half human and half bird. It had little monetary value, so I'm puzzled about that aspect of the burglary." "Perhaps," said Nancy, "the thief believed the piece to be old and rare." "Possibly," her father agreed. Nancy inquired how the burglar might have learned about the contents of the briefcase. Mr. Drew stared into space a moment and then answered, I had a luncheon today with my new client, Mr. Sakamaki. He's a Hawaiian. He talked rather freely about his case, and it was a public restaurant, and perhaps the burglar was seated nearby listening to the conversation. Does the case involve something Polynesian? Asked Nancy. Well, yes and no, the lawyer replied. I'd prefer that Mr. Sakamaki tell you the whole story himself. You may pick up a few points which I missed. He complimented his daughter. When I happened to mention to him that you loved to solve mysteries, he was interested at once. Mr. Drew looked directly at Nancy, a slight smile playing around the corners of his mouth. There's a very unusual mystery in connection with the case. Mr. Sakamaki would like you to solve it for him. Nancy's face broke into a broad grin. And I'd like to do it, she said eagerly. How soon may I talk to Mr. Sakamaki? Tomorrow morning at my office. While Hannah prepared a midnight snack of angel cake and fruit juice, Mr. Drew went to the telephone and called police headquarters. The sergeant on duty reported that his squad had not apprehended the burglar as yet. The clue of the collapsible ladder was an excellent one, he said, and his men had stopped and searched 100 cars in the general area of the Drew home, but no ladder had been found in any of the automobiles. We'll keep on looking, the sergeant promised. Something may turn up yet. The next morning after breakfast, Nancy and her father set out for his office. It was not long after they arrived that Mr. Drew's secretary announced a caller. Mr. Samuel Sakamaki is here. Please show him in, Mr. Drew replied. A smiling man about 40 years old walked in. He was of medium height with lightly bronzed skin and friendly dark eyes. Mr. Drew presented him to Nancy. I'm very happy to meet you, Mr. Sakamaki said, and I hope that you, as well as your father, will consent to taking my case. As everyone sat down, the caller explained that he was part Polynesian, part Japanese. My Polynesian first name means Sam, and when necessary, I use the English version for business. I am very proud of my Polynesian forebears. Mr. Sakamaki explained that he had perfected certain methods for finishing handmade furniture, an art practiced by his Polynesian ancestors. Like them, he used shark skin instead of sandpaper. At present, I am lecturing and demonstrating in a furniture factory here. Mrs. Sakamaki and I have rented a house in River Heights for a year. He went on to say that he had recently inherited a large estate of both money and property from his grandfather, Nico Sakamaki, in Honolulu. The estate was called Kalakula. Abruptly, he asked, Miss Drew, would you like to go there to solve my mystery? From his pocket, he brought out a paper on which two symbols had been drawn. I believe these are a clue that will help. He handed the paper to Nancy, who studied the strange figures. Do you know what they mean? She asked. No, I'm ashamed to say I don't, Mr. Sakamaki replied. I intended trying to find out, but haven't had a chance. The Hawaiian said that shortly before his grandfather's death, the elderly man had mailed the symbols to him without any translation. But a letter accompanying the strange piece of paper had said, Never sell or give away Kalakula until you solve its mystery. Chapter 2. A Suspect. As Nancy stared at the strange symbols, her heart beat a little faster. This was a new and different kind of mystery for her to solve. It sounds like a fascinating case, she commented. Nancy recalled the exciting adventures she had had solving the secret of the old clock, her first mystery, and how many thrilling moments she had experienced during her recent adventure, the haunted showboat. But none of the mysteries had started out with a more challenging clue than the one just presented to her.
Now,
Mr. Sakamaki smiled. You will love Kalakula. The estate is right along the water of Waikiki Beach of Honolulu. It has beautiful gardens and a lovely house, and is a perfect place for a vacation. Nancy looked toward her father. She wondered what he was thinking. The lawyer smiled and said, Mr. Sakamaki, I should think you would want to go there yourself and attend to matters. I suppose I should, the Hawaiian replied, but it would be most inconvenient at this time. My pressing business matters will keep me on the mainland. He turned to Nancy. We Hawaiians call the people in the continental United States mainlanders. Mr. Sakamaki now amazed the Drews by saying that there were two mysteries in connection with settling his grandfather's estate. Only that day he had learned of two claimants, a brother and a sister, who had suddenly appeared in Honolulu, declaring that they were grandchildren of the deceased man. Besides that disturbing news, Mr. Sakamaki went on, I've had word from the caretaker that there have been queer happenings at Kalakula. What kind of happenings? Nancy said. For one thing, the caller replied, a stranger was seen lurking on the estate beach, and when the caretaker went to question him, the man took off hurriedly in a boat. Then there is a golden pavilion on the grounds, and someone has been hacking the floor of it. A golden pavilion, Nancy repeated. Mr. Sakamaki said that it was a circular open building about 30 feet in diameter. It had columns and a roof, all covered with gold leaf. It sounds very unusual, Nancy remarked. In the secret of Kalakula connected with this pavilion? Mr. Sakamaki shrugged. Wherever or whatever the secret is, I should like to have it discovered as quickly as possible. I intend to present the estate to Honolulu with the Golden Pavilion to be used as an outdoor theater. You see, I really don't need Kalakula for myself financially, and I have a lovely home in Honolulu where I prefer living. Then the man's face clouded as he continued. I keep forgetting about the Chatleys. They are the claimants. If they should prove their case, I suppose the estate would have to be split 3 ways. It is doubtful if they would agree to donate Kalakula to Honolulu. They probably want to sell it and take the money to the mainland. Mr. Drew now spoke up. You never heard about these relatives from your grandfather or anyone else? Mr. Sakamaki shook his head. These people are claiming that my grandfather had a wife in California some years before he moved to Honolulu. They further claim that my grandfather abandoned his wife and a baby daughter. Knowing my grandfather as I did, I cannot imagine him doing such a thing. He was somewhat eccentric, but full of kindness. My own parents, who are deceased, never mentioned any such thing taking place. Was your grandfather a Hawaiian? No, he came from Japan, but he married a Polynesian. Mr. Sakamaki told the Drews that the claimants' full names were Roy Chatley and his married sister, Janet Chatley Lee. Both were about 45 years of age. As I said, I've never seen them nor heard of them before, Mr. Sakamaki continued. I had come to your father, Nancy, to ask him to help me settle the estate before this complication arose. I just received a letter about the Chatleys from the bank in Honolulu, which is acting as executor. Now I've come to beg you, Mr. Drew, to investigate this new angle. Just how did your grandfather's will regarding beneficiaries? It stated simply that everything was left to any living grandchildren, Mr. Sakamaki replied. I thought I was the only living blood relative until the Chatleys suddenly came into the picture. He went on to say that Mr. Drew would be handling the legal angles pertaining to the settling of the estate, including the Chatleys' claim. He had thought Nancy would like to take over the part of his case having to do with the secret of Kalakula. Oh, I'd love to, said Nancy eagerly. May I, Dad? The lawyer smiled fondly at his daughter. There is only one hitch, he said. I cannot leave here immediately. Besides, I think my first stop should be Los Angeles, where I'll look into the background of these claimants to the estate. Valuable time would be lost before I could reach Honolulu. Mr. Sakamaki leaned forward in his chair. Perhaps, he said to Nancy, you have some young friends who would go with you. And also your housekeeper? Nancy did not reply at once. Her mind flew to her two chums, Bess Marvin and Bess's tomboy cousin George Fane. But she knew that the expense involved in such a trip would be prohibitive. The Hawaiian apparently had guessed her thoughts. Smiling, he said, I want this mystery solved. Expense means nothing to me. I'll finance the trip for the entire group. Nancy was overwhelmed by the offer. Feeling that it was up to her father to make the decision, she waited for him to speak. Mr. Drew gazed out of his office window for a few moments before replying. Then he turned to Mr. Sakamaki. I will consent to all of this on one condition. The expense involved will be my fee. As you wish, Mr. Sakamaki said. I'll do everything I can to make it a most enjoyable stay for you. He arose and shook hands with the two Drews. You have made me very happy, he added. and I will leave you now to make your own plans. I will be in touch with you soon." Bowing slightly, he left the office. At once, Nancy went over to her father and threw her arms around his neck. "It sounds marvelous, doesn't it? Almost like a dream. I can hardly believe it." Her father agreed and said he hoped that Bess and George would be able to go with Nancy, as well as Hannah Gruen. "I'll make arrangements for you all to fly to Honolulu as soon as you let me know if the girls can go." He suddenly noticed that his daughter's smile had faded. Her expression was tense, and she was staring at the window. "What's the matter?" the lawyer asked her. Nancy pointed, and her father turned to look in the direction. On the rooftop of a nearby office building was a man opening a collapsible ladder. As the Drews watched, he placed it against the window of an adjoining building. "He may be the thief who got into our house last night," Nancy cried out. "It looks like the same kind of ladder." Instantly, Mr. Drew turned to his telephone. He put in a call to a lawyer he knew who occupied the office where the open window was. After a few moments of conversation, he hung up and said to Nancy, "The man is a window washer, but we probably should investigate him." "Let's go talk to him right now," Nancy urged. Mr. Drew agreed, and they went immediately to the office of his lawyer friend. They learned from him that the window washer's name was Abe Antock, and that he worked for Acme Window Cleaning Company. Nancy hastened to the window where the man was working. After a few casual remarks to Abe Antock, she asked, "Isn't it unusual for ladders to be used for washing office windows?" "Yes, ma'am, it is," Abe replied. "But my boss and me, we've been inventing this ladder. You notice it's kind of special. We hope to put it in on the market someday and make a lot of money. But a few kinks have to be ironed out yet. I use it in places that are hard to get to." "I see," said Nancy. "By the way, how high will it reach?" "Oh, very high, miss," Abe replied proudly. "Could it reach the 3rd floor of a house?" "Oh, sure," Abe answered. "I've used it a couple of times for that. Worked fine." During the conversation, Nancy had made up her mind that Abe in no way seemed like a housebreaker. A new thought suddenly came to her, and she asked, "Do you ever rent out this kind of ladder?" Abe Antock looked at Nancy in amusement. "That's a funny question, miss," he said. "As a matter of fact, I did, just once. That was last night." "What did the person who rented the ladder want to do with it?" Nancy asked quickly. "To tell you the truth, miss," Abe replied, "Mr. Jim O'Keefe, that's the name of the man who rented the ladder, said he wanted to try it out. He came to our place just about quitting time and gave my boss and me a great sales talk. Said he handled stock or something like that. He told us that he could set us up in business and make a lot of money for us. We fell for it and gave him the ladder to try out." "Where is Jim O'Keefe now?" Nancy inquired eagerly. Abe Antock's face took on a sour look. "My boss and me sure had the wool pull over our eyes. We found the ladder back of the shop this morning. When we didn't hear nothing from O'Keefe, my boss called the hotel where he was staying. He'd skipped out without paying his bill." "That's very interesting," said Nancy. "What did this man look like?" Abe described Jim O'Keefe as being of medium height, dark, slender, and with thinning hair. "Did he have any outstanding characteristics by which you could identify him?" Nancy asked. Abe thought for a moment, and then he answered, "Yes, he did." O'Keefe drummed on my boss's desk with his fingers. Then he raised up his 2 fingers and put the tips of them together. "Kind of funny thing to do, wasn't it?" Nancy agreed. She thanked Abe for answering her questions and then hurried over to her father, who was conversing with his lawyer friend. "I have a wonderful clue on our thief," she said excitedly, and then told the 2 men about Jim O'Keefe. Mr. Drew asked permission to use the phone and called the police. Captain McGinnis thanked him for the new clue and said he would get in touch with the lawyer as soon as he had any news. Nancy and her father returned to Mr. Drew's office. For several minutes they discussed the mystery, Kalakula, and its secret, the strange claimants to the Takamaki estate, the burglar, and the proposed trip to Honolulu. Nancy chuckled softly. "You know, Dad, there's one thing I haven't told you. Certain friends of Bess, George, and myself are going on a chartered plane trip from Emerson College to Honolulu when their vacation begins." "You mean Ned Nickerson, Bert Eddleton, and Dave Evans?" her father asked. "That's right, Dad. we'll have a whole fleet of mainland detectives to solve the Kalakula mystery. That's the end of chapter 2. We'll discuss this on Wednesday under Book Club and continue with chapter 3 next week. Have a great day.